I know some quilters have border prints left over from projects, or they see a really pretty border print in a quilt shop and they think, boy, I wish I knew what I could do with it, because they don't have a quilt to put a border around. So I'm going to show you some ways, different ways to use border prints other than just in your outer border. And here are some samples of border prints that I have. A couple of them are Ginny Beyer prints, and of course all of her border prints have a large, wider border than the other one. So there's a narrow border and a wider border, and that's typical of most of her border prints. Here's another one. Again, this has wider prints and narrow prints, and it has different kinds of prints in it. So you can see there's different things you could do with different kinds of borders. And I have an example here of one that's got all kinds of fun little things in it. And this would be great for a miniature. If you didn't want to piece a little sashing or a small border in a miniature, I could cut 1/4 of an inch from this little checkerboard, and I could use it in a border or a sashing, and people would think that you did all that sewing and they would be impressed. But you can see there's all kinds of little border prints in here, or little stripes in here that I could do different things with. So let me show you an example of what you could do with a border print. Now this is a quilt that I made that had 2 different kinds of border prints on it. It had this border here, and it had, let me open it up a little bit here. It had 2 borders. It had this border here, and then it had this border here in it. So it had 2 distinct border prints. So what I did was I made it into a row quilt. You know what a row quilt is, or a horizontal quilt? It's just a quilt that has rows across. And so instead of putting all rows, I put one of the border prints in between the rows. So I was able to use up that second border print. And then the inside of the blocks, this little part of the block here, this is called a St. Louis star, I fussy cut these little bitty roses in here and put those in the center, and then I had leftover border print to put in the border of this quilt. So you can always use it in a row quilt or a horizontal quilt, or a vertical quilt if you want to go up and down. Here is an example of a quilt I did with a border print. The border print looks like this. So it has 2 distinct borders. So it has these cute little fairies or women that are gardening, and it has little mushrooms. And so what I did was I had some templates, and I decided to cut on this border print. So for this, I made a little table runner or a placemat, and I cut the triangle, elongated triangle, from the border, and I also cut the little corner triangles. So what I did was I laid my template along the edge of one of the borders. I laid it across this yellow border, and it included my seam allowance. And then I took a triangle and I laid that along the border too, so I could create that corner triangle. So here's the corner right here, and here's the elongated diamond triangle. So you can see that I could fussy cut, and then I used that same border in the outside, except I used a little bit more of it. I included this part of the border print here, so it made this cute little placemat or table runner. I could add more borders around this in different colors to go with the quilt, and it would make a fast, easy quilt. Another way you could use border prints in different places is to put them in the block. Another way to put it in the block. Now these are some quilts. Use this one first. This is a quilt that I made with my New York Beauty templates. I have a pattern on National Quilters Circle that uses this New York Beauty template. And what I did was I took one of these border prints, one of these Ginny Beyer border prints, kind of like this one, and I cut a circle, a 1/4 circle that goes right in here in the inside of the border of the block. And then I used a miter, and I cut this part of it, and I created a miter backing for that block. So I used both the border print here on the outside, And I used it also, that same border print, but it had a smaller print in it in this part here. Let me show you a better example of this. Here's Ginny Beyer. This is a Ginny Beyer border, and it came in 2 different colorways. Okay, so you can see there's 2 colors of the same border print. And the New York Beauty, this is what I was talking about, the miter. And so what I did was I laid my template along one of these lines here like this. Let me find the matching one and you can kind of see. Well, here's where I have holes in it, where I cut them out. But let me show you where it matches. So I took this template I had and I put it on just like that, where that border print is, and I matched up all the little parts of it like that. You see that, how it disappears? So I cut those, I cut a left and a right piece of it, and that's how I put it in the back. But I thought it would be kind of fun to do 2 different colors on that back miter. So I cut one from this fabric, and I cut one from this fabric. And so now I have 2 different color miters, and I can sew them together to create the back of that New York Beauty block. Here are some more examples of using the border print in my New York Beauty block. So here's the border. That's the original border, and here's the smaller pieces that went around it. So again, I made that miter in the back of it, and I also used that same border print here to cut the quarter circles. So here's the quarter circle, and so everything's cut from this border, and it creates a really interesting quilt. Here's another example where I did the same thing. This time, what I did was, I not only used the border print to cut the center and the back of the block here, but I also used the smaller print in that border, the smaller stripe, and I created an inside border. So I didn't use the border print in the outside. I don't think I had enough to finish the whole thing with the border print. So I used the smaller one here. I used the bigger one, which you can see it has these little blue lines in it, which are in this. So you can see how it uses parts of that border. And then here I use that same print. Here's those little blue stripes again, and I put it in the center, made quarter circles, and I put it in the center of the New York Beauty block. Sometimes you have small stripes. This is a quilt that I made that had little small stripes in it, and I put those as the miter in the background of my New York Beauty block. I didn't want to put it in the center, so I had a coordinating flower that I put in the center, and I fussy cut that. And then this final example is another way that you can use border prints. Again, it's the New York Beauty block. It happens to be one of my favorite blocks. And what I did was, I put it in the border print. It was a stripe that I put in the center of the block. Okay, so instead it creates a diamond or a square. You can see here it is here. And I created that, and then I used another part of the border to create an inner border for this quilt, and then I went ahead again and used the border print to put on the inside of the circles on the New York Beauty. So there's all different kinds of things you can do to fussy cut border prints, or to just put them somewhere else in a quilt besides just the borders. And I encourage you to use templates, do anything you want, but cut up those border prints and do something different with them.